They say time is a river, but what if history is the silt that sinks beneath its surface, soft, silenced, and rearranged with each passing current? Somewhere beneath the monuments of certainty lies the echo of an unspoken question, a silence too loud to ignore. The Great Pyramids, icons carved into the skin of the earth, have always stood as symbols of Egyptian glory. But what if they were never truly theirs? What if the origin story we accept is only the most convenient one? Let go of what you think you know. Close your eyes and drift with us into the forgotten. This is historic sleep. And tonight, we begin again. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. There's something oddly quiet about Giza before sunrise. The wind, though constant, seems afraid to disturb the sand. And the pyramids? They don't glow with the reverence of ancient triumph. They loom like sentinels caught in a trance. For over 4,000 years, they've defied time, gravity, and explanation. But what if the greatest mystery isn't how they were built, but who left them behind? The textbook story is simple. Pharaohs, slaves, limestone, an empire's will translated into stone. But even this narrative, polished and institutionalized, cracks under scrutiny. Consider this. The Great Pyramid of Khufu aligns almost perfectly with true north, within 3/60ths of a single degree. That's an accuracy modern construction crews would struggle to replicate without GPS. The stones themselves, some weighing over 70 tons, are placed with a precision that not only resists the erosion of millennia, but mocks it. How did men, without wheels or iron tools, manage such feats? The deeper you look, the more the story frays. Herodotus, the so-called father of history, visited Egypt 2,000 years after the pyramids were supposedly constructed. Even then, Egyptian priests spoke in riddles. They told him the pyramids were built in a span of 20 years, using machines made of short wooden planks. Herodotus, either bewildered or unconvinced, recorded the tale. But he never described seeing any such devices. No drawings survive. No evidence remains. Why? And then there's the strange case of the inventory stela, a stone artifact discovered near the Great Pyramid in the 19th century. It mentions Khufu not as the builder of the Great Pyramid, but as someone who merely repaired it, a restorer, not a creator. Egyptologists dismiss this as anachronistic fiction, despite its clear implications. But why would an ancient stele lie? And why has this stele remained in obscurity, largely absent from public discourse? The truth, perhaps, is too inconvenient. If the pyramids were already ancient by the time of Khufu, then what civilization came before? Mainstream archaeology insists there's no evidence of advanced societies predating dynastic Egypt. But is absence of evidence the same as evidence of absence? In 1991, geological analysis of the Sphinx enclosure by Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist, not an archaeologist, revealed weathering patterns inconsistent with wind erosion. The vertical striations suggested prolonged water erosion, implying the Sphinx could be over 10,000 years old, from a time when Egypt was not a desert, but a land of rain. The academic community reacted with fury. Not just disagreement, but disdain. Peer-reviewed journals refused to publish the findings. Conferences excluded discussion. The gates of orthodoxy slammed shut. Why such panic over a few erosion marks? Because if the Sphinx is older than 2500 BCE, then the timeline of human civilization collapses. It would mean that not only did an unknown culture exist during the last ice age, but that it possessed the engineering prowess to sculpt stone on a monumental scale. And if they could carve the Sphinx, could they have built the pyramids? There's no proof, they say. But what counts as proof when history itself is curated? The foundation of accepted chronology, Egyptian dynasties, Mesopotamian kings, Sumerian tablets, was largely assembled in the 19th and early 20th centuries through interpretations made by a handful of Western scholars. Many were influenced by religious timelines, colonial ideologies, or the simple human need to make sense of the chaotic. Mistakes, assumptions, and deliberate omissions were baked into the historical record like artifacts into tar. And now we live by those timelines as though they were absolute. But what if they're not? What if our most sacred dates, our neatly arranged centuries and dynasties, are wrong? Think of it. A pyramid that no one knows how to replicate. A monument aligned to the stars, constructed with a mastery of mathematics and astronomy that defies explanation. No blueprints, no inscriptions inside, not a single carving that definitively links the Great Pyramid to Khufu, except a few red ochre marks discovered in a hidden chamber in 1837 by Colonel Howard Vyse, a British explorer whose reputation was tarnished by accusations of forgery. And yet, those red markings are the primary evidence used to date the entire structure. Could the foundation of pyramid dating rest on a fraud? We don't know. But that uncertainty, so casually dismissed, is a crack in the wall of certainty. Cracks let light in, or perhaps something darker. The pyramids are not tombs. No mummies were ever found inside. No funerary texts. No sarcophagus inscriptions bearing the pharaoh's name. The Great Pyramid's so-called King's Chamber is an empty granite box, smooth, cold, silent, like a vessel waiting to be activated or remembered. And above it, 5 relieving chambers stacked in mysterious silence. One of them contains the disputed cartouche of Khufu. The rest are blank. Were they really constructed just to prevent collapse, or do they hide some other purpose? Perhaps more unsettling than the pyramid's existence is the void of knowledge around them. It is as though someone went to great lengths to erase the truth, to cleanse the slate, to leave us with only the shell, not the blueprint. The desert is not empty, it is veiled. And in that veil, a question lingers like breath on glass. If the pyramids were not built by Egyptians, then who was erased to make room for them? A name carved in haste, in red pigment, hidden above a chamber never meant to be entered. This is all we have to tie the Great Pyramid to Khufu. And yet entire centuries of belief rest upon it. But what if that name was not a mark of authorship, but of ownership, like a monarch stamping his crest on a relic already ancient in his time? What if Khufu didn't build the pyramid, but merely found it? There's something haunting about a structure with no clear beginning. It looms like a riddle with its question erased. The oldest building on Earth should carry signs of its genesis. Tools, scaffolding remnants, experimental failures, gradual improvements. But the Great Pyramid shows none of these. It arrives in history fully formed, perfect in proportion, flawless in orientation, unmatched in scale. It has no prototype, no learning curve, no evolution. That is not how civilizations build. Even the most brilliant cultures leave trails of trial and error. We see it in Gothic cathedrals, Roman aqueducts, Mayan pyramids, each design refined over time. But in Giza, the supposed first attempt is the most advanced. After the Great Pyramid, the following pyramids, Khafra and Menkaure, are smaller, simpler, and structurally weaker. Later dynasties built crude replicas that crumbled within centuries. The trajectory is reversed. Instead of progress, we see decline. How does that make sense? Unless the Great Pyramid was not the start of something, but the remnant of something long lost. Some scholars dismiss this idea as romanticism, a yearning for ancient wisdom. But evidence doesn't always wear name tags. Consider the Osirian at Abydos, a mysterious underground temple, partially buried and misaligned with the rest of the site. Its blocks are massive, over 100 tons, interlocked with such precision that no mortar is needed. The temple appears older than the structures built atop it. Egyptologists label it New Kingdom, but the weathering on its sandstone says otherwise. It speaks of an age when the Nile's waters once flowed, where now only dust remains. Is it possible that multiple layers of history coexist on the same ground, some visible, some denied? The Giza Plateau itself is an archaeological palimpsest. Cores drilled into the bedrock reveal sediment layers inconsistent with desert formation. Fossilized shells, ancient lake beds, geological whispers of a time when the Sahara was lush, green, fertile. This epoch, known as the African Humid Period, ended around 5000 BCE. But what if the builders of the pyramids predated even that? Could it be that the structures we attribute to the Egyptians were inherited by them? Not built, inherited. Inherited by a civilization whose own origins are cloaked in forgetting. The ancient Egyptians themselves spoke of a time before the pharaohs, a period ruled by the Shemsu Hor, or followers of Horus. These semi-mythical beings appear in king lists, temple inscriptions, and oral tradition. Their reign, said to have lasted thousands of years, is dismissed by modern historians as symbolic or allegorical. But why? Why would a culture so obsessed with lineage fabricate a legacy of rulers stretching back into the mists of prehistory? Unless they remembered something we do not. Unless those gods were the survivors of a forgotten world. And what if that world ended, suddenly? Here the ground trembles with another question. Around 10,800 BCE, something catastrophic occurred. Climate records from Greenland ice cores show a sudden plunge in global temperatures, an event now called the Younger Dryas. Simultaneously, across North America and parts of Europe, thousands of megafauna species vanished. Vast regions were scorched by mysterious fires. The surface of the Earth, it seems, was reset. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, once fringe, is now gaining traction. It proposes that fragments of a disintegrating comet struck the planet, triggering global upheaval. Black mats of carbon-rich sediment, nanodiamonds, and melted glass beads, known as impact proxies, have been found at over 50 sites across 4 continents. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the oldest known megalithic temple, shows signs of sudden burial around the same time. Could the flood myths of ancient cultures, Noah, Gilgamesh, Manu, be fractured memories of this event? And if so, could the survivors of such a cataclysm have left behind messages in stone? The Great Pyramid, if viewed not as a tomb but a signal, takes on new meaning. Its internal shafts align with celestial coordinates, the Orion Belt, Sirius, Thuban, stars venerated not just by Egyptians, but by civilizations spanning the globe. The proportions of the pyramid encode mathematical constants. Pi, the golden ratio, the curvature of the Earth. Its height multiplied by 43,200 equals the polar radius of the Earth. Its base, multiplied by the same number, gives the planet's equatorial circumference. Coincidence or design? And who would have known the precise dimensions of the planet thousands of years ago? Modern scholars struggle with these correlations. They dismiss them as numerological cherry-picking. But too many alignments converge. Too many coincidences become a pattern. The pyramid begins to feel less like a tomb and more like a machine. A harmonized structure tuned to Earth's dimensions, a monument to knowledge, not mortality. But if it is a machine, what does it do? No one knows. And perhaps that's the point. Perhaps its function is not mechanical, but mnemonic, not a machine of gears, but of memory. A message left behind by those who knew they would not survive, who knew that fire and ice were coming, that the sky would fall, that time would erase them. And so they built something that time could not erase. But even stone forgets when no one remembers what to look for. We are left staring at a triangle in the sand, a riddle wrapped in granite, a whisper buried under centuries of silence. We call it Egyptian because we have no other name. But names are fragile things. They can be painted, claimed, rewritten. The stones, however, do not lie. They simply endure. And in their endurance, they wait. Not for answers, but for better questions. There is a kind of silence that does not stem from peace, but from something lost. A silence that presses against the skin like cold stone, full of absence, not tranquility. That is the silence of the Great Pyramid, a silence not of completion, but of interruption. Something was left unfinished, or worse, forgotten. We stand in awe of its permanence, but permanence was never its purpose. Not really. Permanence is what remains when purpose is erased. Look closer. The pyramid is not just a mass of stone, it's an equation, one that speaks not in numbers, but in ratios, resonances, and alignments. Its corners point almost perfectly to the cardinal directions. Its location, 29.97922 degrunts, echoes the exact speed of light in meters per second, 299,792,458. A meaningless coincidence, some argue. After all, meters are a modern invention. But is that really a dismissal? Or just another question buried in disbelief? Because maybe, just maybe, it's not that they knew the meter. Maybe it's that we rediscovered a measure already known. And what else have we discovered that may in fact be echoes? In 1839, John Taylor published a radical theory that the pyramid encoded the value of pi. Later, Charles Piazzi Smith expanded on this, identifying dozens of measurements in the Great Pyramid that appeared to mirror geophysical constants: the Earth's radius, the length of the solar year, the axial tilt. He was ridiculed, dismissed as a dreamer. Yet decades later, satellite measurements would confirm many of the figures he proposed. How did a 19th-century theorist, with no access to orbital data, stumble onto truths that required space-age instruments? Or perhaps the better question is, how did the pyramid builders know them thousands of years earlier? The answer might lie not in who built the pyramids, but in what they believed. The ancient world was not divided between science and spirit as we see it now. For them, to know the stars was to know the soul. Mathematics was not a tool. It was a language spoken by the divine. Architecture was ritual. Proportion was prayer. When they built, they did not simply assemble materials. They harmonized with something eternal. And the Great Pyramid hums. Yes, hums. In 2020, a team of physicists at ITMO University in Russia published a study showing that the pyramid can concentrate electromagnetic energy into its internal chambers. Using simulations, they demonstrated that under certain frequencies, the pyramid acts as a resonator. Not metaphorically, but physically. Its geometry amplifies and channels energy in ways we are only beginning to understand. But to what end? No wires, no circuitry, no visible mechanisms. And yet, resonance, energy, vibration. Nikola Tesla once said, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." He too studied pyramidal shapes, and even claimed to receive signals from beyond while experimenting with high-frequency transmission. What if he wasn't alone? What if the ancient builders too were listening? And perhaps the pyramid was built, not to be seen, but to be heard. There is another mystery, rarely mentioned, but no less profound. Deep within the Great Pyramid is a small, narrow shaft, rising from the king's chamber toward the stars. It is too small for a person to enter. For decades, its purpose remained unknown. Then, in 1993, a robotic probe was sent through the shaft. It found a small stone door. Another probe was sent in 2002, this one equipped with a camera. Behind the door was a tiny cavity, and another stone etched with copper pins. A sealed compartment hidden in a shaft too narrow to access, behind a door with metal fittings. What was behind that second stone? No one knows. To this day, the chamber remains unopened. Why? What are we afraid to find? Or more chillingly, what are we trying not to disturb? Sometimes the most terrifying truths are not those we uncover, but those we glimpse, then turn away from. The existence of inaccessible chambers inside the pyramid brings back another strange truth. We do not fully understand its internal design. In 2017, using muon tomography, a technique that tracks subatomic particles, researchers detected a previously unknown void above the Grand Gallery. This space is massive, at least 30 meters long. What's inside? Nothing. Or so they say. But how many times must we repeat that word, nothing, before we realize it no longer satisfies? We are told the void is a structural feature, just a weight-relieving gap. But those same voids are echoed in sacred structures across the ancient world. Temples with hidden spaces, dolmens with unmarked chambers, tunnels beneath ziggurats. Why did so many cultures build what cannot be accessed? Maybe they weren't building for us. Maybe they were building for something else. To store, to preserve, to remember, or to forget. If the pyramid was a monument to knowledge, then what knowledge did it hold? What truth could have been so precious, so dangerous, that it had to be encrypted into stone? Was it a warning, a prophecy, a cipher for a future we have not yet earned? And why does the modern world treat such questions with contempt? Mainstream academia ridicules speculation around the pyramids. Anyone who deviates from accepted timelines is labeled a pseudo-archaeologist, no matter the evidence. But ridicule is not rebuttal. It is a mechanism of control. a way to protect the narrative. And when the narrative must be protected, it is no longer history, it is orthodoxy. The Great Pyramid, then, may be less of a mystery and more of a mirror of our own arrogance, of our own fear, of our need to believe that we are the pinnacle, that the past was always beneath us, never beside us, never beyond us. But the pyramid doesn't speak to power, it speaks to humility, to wonder, to silence. And in that silence, the stones whisper a question. If the pyramid is not what we've been told, then what else might we be wrong about? The night sky over Giza is thick with stars, but the desert air makes them feel distant, as if the heavens remember something we do not. Orion rises slowly, the belt tilted just slightly, perfectly mirroring the three pyramids below. This alignment is not poetic license, it is geometric fact. But why? Why would builders from the Bronze Age align monuments of stone to a constellation that holds no functional value in agriculture or flood cycles? Unless they were tracing something older than myth. In 1994, engineer Robert Bauval proposed the Orion correlation theory, the idea that the layout of the pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure correspond to the three stars in Orion's belt, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. Not only do their relative positions match, but their brightness levels align with the respective size of the pyramids. The Nile River, flowing to the east, mirrors the Milky Way. The implication is chilling in its precision. Giza is a map, not of Earth, but of the sky. Skeptics dismiss this as pareidolia, a tendency to find patterns where none exist. But how many alignments does it take before a pattern becomes undeniable? The shaft in the so-called Queen's Chamber points directly toward Sirius, the brightest star in the sky and sacred to the goddess Isis. The King's Chamber shaft targets Orion, sacred to Osiris. These are not arbitrary lines. They are deliberate connections, bridges between heaven and earth, between myth and architecture. But if these alignments were built into the pyramid, it means the builders knew the positions of these stars, not just in the present, but in the past. And that changes everything, because stars move. Over thousands of years, the Earth wobbles in its rotation, a phenomenon called axial precession. This causes constellations to shift over time. Bauval demonstrated that the alignment between Orion's belt and the pyramids would have been most precise not in 2500 BCE, but in 10,500 BCE. A date that rewrites everything. A date that aligns not only the stars above Giza, but the rising of Leo on the eastern horizon, precisely where the Sphinx faces. If the Sphinx was meant to gaze at its celestial counterpart, it would have been built during that same epoch. Not the time of Khafre, but the time of something forgotten. Is it possible that the pyramids, the Sphinx, and the stars form a clock? Not one that tells time, but one that remembers it? Ancient Egyptians revered the idea of Zep Tepi, the first time. A mythical golden age when gods walked among men, when wisdom was pure and power was shared. Scholars regard it as symbolic, an origin myth. But what if Zep Tepi was not myth, but memory? A memory of a time before the flood, before fire fell from the sky, before the stars drifted from their stations. And what if the pyramids are the last remaining traces of that age? Consider this. The pyramid texts, carved into the walls of burial chambers centuries after the Great Pyramid was built, speak not of building pyramids, but of returning to them. They reference the stairway to the stars, the celestial ladder, the imperishable stars to which the soul ascends. There is no instruction manual, no mention of construction techniques, only reverence, as though the pyramids were already ancient, already sacred by the time these words were etched. And the gods they mention, Osiris, Isis, Thoth, are not described as creators, but as custodians, caretakers of something older. What were they protecting? The notion that ancient Egypt was the inheritor, not the originator, of its greatness is supported not only by astronomy, but by myth. The god Thoth was said to have created 42 books of sacred knowledge. These books, legend says, were hidden in a secret chamber within or beneath a temple. Some versions say the Great Pyramid, others say deep beneath the Sphinx. When Napoleon's men surveyed the area in 1798, they reported rumors of tunnels leading under the monument. 100 years later, the famed occultist Edgar Cayce spoke of a hall of records buried beneath the Sphinx's paws, a repository of Atlantean wisdom to be revealed when mankind was ready. Fantasy, perhaps. But in 1997, seismic surveys conducted by Thomas Dobecki and John Anthony West detected large, unexplained cavities beneath the Sphinx. These findings were confirmed by geophysicist Thomas Brophy. And yet, no excavations followed. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities denied further exploration, citing preservation. Why deny investigation into a non-intrusive anomaly? What lies beneath that cannot be disturbed? What are we not allowed to find? It is here the veil begins to thin. Not in evidence, but in absence. The way a painting is outlined not by its strokes, but by the blank spaces between them, the gaps in the record, the doors left unopened, the questions left unanswered. Because to challenge the pyramid's origins is to challenge the foundations of human history. Not just when, but what we are, what we've been, and perhaps what we've forgotten. If humanity once possessed a unified knowledge, a sacred science encoded in architecture, astronomy, and myth, then its loss was not accidental. Something severed that thread. Some cataclysm scattered the pieces, and the pyramids, silent and enduring, are the remnants. Not built for us, but left for us. Clues in stone. Echoes of a time when the heavens and earth were not separate, but aligned. And now, we live in the echo, the map without the key, the altar without the god. We walk beside these monuments every day, cameras in hand, dismissing them as the tombs of dead kings. But the kings are silent, the tombs are empty, and the pyramid still watches the stars. As if waiting for memory to return, waiting for us to ask the question buried beneath all others. What if the pyramids were never meant to explain the past, but to warn the future? There is something unsettling about an empty sarcophagus, especially one carved from a single block of granite, perfectly smoothed, with no chisel marks, no signs of tool work, and placed inside a chamber so narrow that no one can explain how it got there. In the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, this box sits silent, hollow, waiting. Egyptologists call it a coffin, though no body was found, no remains, no jewelry, no writing, only stillness. But perhaps that's where the real story begins. In the absence, in what isn't there. If the Great Pyramid wasn't a tomb, then what was it? Some say it was a monument to power, others a calendar. Some whisper it was an initiation chamber where the soul was reborn through ritual and resonance. Still others believe it was a transmitter, a kind of spiritual technology meant to preserve not the body, but the vibration of consciousness. The box in the king's chamber, often called a sarcophagus, resonates when struck. Engineers have noted that it produces a deep, ringing tone, one that echoes through the granite-lined chamber with surprising clarity. And the chamber itself? It's built entirely from red granite, dense, radioactive, and piezoelectric, a stone that responds to pressure with energy. Not a coincidence, not if intention was involved. Tests conducted in recent years found that the room amplifies sound, not randomly, not chaotically, but in harmony. A forward 40 Hz, the tuning note for most Western instruments, reverberates through the space with eerie efficiency. Ancient builders, it seems, understood acoustics not just as function, but as a form of knowledge. But how? And more disturbingly, why? If the chamber amplifies sound, what was meant to be heard there? Was it ritual? Was it healing? Or was it memory? Preserved not in text, but in vibration. We often think of memory as words. But what if older civilizations remembered in ways we've forgotten? Through resonance, geometry, architecture. What if the Great Pyramid is not a message written in language, but in frequency? Theories like these, once fringe, are now entering serious discussion. Not because of belief, but because of results. In 2018, a team at the University of Amsterdam studied the pyramid's internal geometry and discovered that it could focus electromagnetic energy into the king's chamber. Not light, not heat, but subtle, invisible energy. The kind associated with radio waves, resonance, and quantum coherence. Why would a stone structure do that? And more importantly, who would know how to make it happen? This isn't about fantasy. It's about forgotten capability. A kind of knowledge so different from our current model that we don't even know how to see it. Ancient Egypt is full of examples. The Dendera light, carved in the Hathor temple, shows what looks remarkably like an electrical lamp. The Baghdad battery, the Antikythera mechanism. Isolated anomalies, yes, but too many to ignore. We are told to view each as coincidence, misinterpretation. But maybe that's the mistake. Maybe these aren't exceptions. Maybe they're the only surviving hints of a larger system. A system shattered by time. Misunderstood. Buried under our desire to always place ourselves at the center of history. But the center may be somewhere else. Because Egypt's mysteries do not exist in isolation. Across the world, we find echoes, megalithic structures built with similar precision, similar alignments, similar techniques. Stonehenge in England, the Osirian in Egypt, Pumapunku in Bolivia. Each site defies conventional explanation. Blocks weighing dozens or even hundreds of tons, fitted together so tightly that not even a razor blade can slide between them. And the same patterns emerge: astronomical alignments, acoustic properties, inexplicable engineering. These sites are not the result of cultural diffusion, not with oceans and continents between them, not with time spans that stretch thousands of years. The similarity suggests not contact, but convergence, a shared understanding, a global inheritance, or perhaps a forgotten predecessor. What kind of civilization could do this? And why did it vanish? One possibility returns us to the Younger Dryas event, roughly 12,800 years ago. A sudden shift in climate, massive floods, superstorms, the end of the last ice age. This is the moment encoded in myths across the globe. The sinking of Atlantis, the flood of Noah, the deluge of Gilgamesh, always a great civilization, always a terrible loss. Mainstream science acknowledges the event, but not the memory. It's cautious, careful. But caution is not the same as truth. And memory, when shared across cultures with no known connection, becomes more than coincidence. Perhaps the pyramids weren't built after this catastrophe, but before it, or by the survivors of it. A race with knowledge deep and ancient, not magical, but real, practical, rooted in observations of the stars, the earth, the vibrational nature of matter itself. A science that we no longer recognize because it was built on a different foundation. Not control, but harmony. Not conquest, but alignment. And if this is true, if even part of it is true, then our understanding of history isn't just incomplete, it's inverted. We are not the inheritors of progress. We are the descendants of collapse, the children of a civilization that fell, that fractured, and that tried, desperately, to leave behind a beacon, a monument immune to time, to fire, to flood. Stone. The Great Pyramid is not just an object, it is a threshold, a hinge in time, a moment where two worlds meet, the one we remember and the one we do not. And in that place, in that silence, the air seems to shift. Because the question has never really been whether the Egyptians built the pyramids. The real question is, what happens when we finally listen to what the stones have been trying to tell us? Somewhere beneath the sands of Giza, beneath layers of time, erosion, and myth, lies a silence that's deeper than history. Not just the absence of noise, but a kind of waiting, the feeling of something hidden just behind the veil. And perhaps, just perhaps, something once sealed away. Why does the Sphinx stare east? Why, for thousands of years, has it held that gaze, unblinking, unmoved, toward the horizon, where the sun rises only once every equinox with perfect alignment? It is not random. It is not aesthetic. It is ritual. It is calibration. It is memory. The Sphinx, carved from a single limestone outcrop, not assembled like the pyramids, shows deep signs of erosion. Not from sand or wind, but from water. Long vertical fissures carved over centuries of heavy rainfall. But Giza has been arid for over 5,000 years. The last time Egypt received that kind of rain was during the African humid period, between 10,000 and 5,000 BCE. If the erosion is accurate, then the Sphinx predates all known Egyptian dynasties. Geologist Robert Schoch, who first brought this evidence to light, faced immediate backlash. Egyptologists rejected his findings, not by disproving them, but by denying their relevance. It can't be older, they said, because there was no civilization then capable of building it. But is that science or circular reasoning? If evidence contradicts the timeline, do we revise the evidence or the timeline? It's here that the silence deepens. Because if the Sphinx is older than the narrative of Egyptian history, so carefully constructed across textbooks and museums, begins to ripple. And those ripples don't stop at Egypt's borders. They stretch outward, across deserts, oceans, continents, across time, to Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Discovered in the 1990s, Göbekli Tepe shattered assumptions. Carved stone circles, some 12,000 years old, arranged with astronomical precision, decorated with animal motifs and geometric codes. built by hunter-gatherers, we are told. People with no agriculture, no writing, no cities. And yet, they moved 10-ton pillars. They carved reliefs with symbolic complexity. They aligned structures to the stars. And when they were done, they buried it. Why? Who buries a temple? Not to hide it from others, but to preserve it from something. What if Göbekli Tepe and the Sphinx are not isolated anomalies, but fragments of the same forgotten past? A past erased not by time, but by survival. If a global catastrophe struck, an impact event, a superflood, a sudden pole shift, what would remain? Not paper, not data, not speech, only stone, and only if built to endure. The Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, Göbekli Tepe, they are not just structures, they are messages, markers, lighthouses for a shipwrecked species trying to find its way back to something it once knew. And maybe once feared, because there's another layer, one that makes even seasoned historians uncomfortable. Across the ancient world, we find stories of beings, luminous, towering, godlike, who arrived after the Great Flood, not creators, but restorers, teachers, bearers of knowledge. In Sumer, they were the Apkallu. In Mesoamerica, the Viracochas. In Egypt, the Neteru. They came not to rule, but to rebuild. And then, they disappeared. Were these just myths or memories? And if they were memories, fossilized in myth, distorted by time, what were these beings? Gods, aliens, or remnants of an advanced human race that survived the cataclysm and tried to plant seeds in the ashes? The idea is seductive, dangerously so, because it threatens the myth of linear progress. It suggests that we are not the peak, but a return, that the future we imagine may be a shadow of the past we forgot. That perhaps the Great Pyramid was not the beginning of civilization, but the last breath of an older one. This theory, often called the lost civilization hypothesis, is met with ridicule. And yet every year, new anomalies appear. Underwater ruins off the coast of Japan at Yonaguni, megalithic terraces in Peru, the Baalbek platform in Lebanon, giant stones weighing over 800 tons, precisely placed, with no known technology, even today, capable of replicating it on site. Who did this? And why don't we know? The answer may lie not in absence, but in suppression. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeology was not an impartial science. It was filtered through nationalism, religious dogma, colonial power. Excavations were funded by empires. Interpretations served narratives. Evidence that fit the model was promoted. That which didn't? Silenced. Lost in basements, dismissed in footnotes, or never published at all. We assume the truth rises naturally through time. But what if the truth is buried intentionally? Not out of malice, but fear. Because if the past is more mysterious, more powerful than we admit, then we are no longer in control of the story. And history, at its core, is about control. To control the past is to define the present. To define the present is to shape the future. And so we build museums not to explore, but to explain. We mark dates, assign meanings, set boundaries. We place the pyramids in their box, label them tombs, and close the case. The mystery is solved. The silence is muted. But the pyramid is still there, still misaligned with our understanding, still aligned with the stars, still humming in a frequency we cannot hear, but may one day remember. Perhaps that's all it takes. One act of remembering. A dream, a whisper, a resonance in the stone. Because in the end, the question is not whether the Egyptians built the pyramids. The question is, what kind of world had to exist for such a monument to be necessary at all? It is a strange thing to look at something that has stood unchanged for thousands of years and realize that the story wrapped around it may be no older than your grandfather's books. We gaze at the Great Pyramid as if it belongs to our collective past. But the narrative we've attached to it, the textbooks, the museum plaques, the neatly printed timelines, is recent, brittle, and suspiciously convenient. Because if this structure is as ancient and mysterious as it appears, then why does our story of it feel so shallow? Why are we so certain it was a tomb when we have never found a body? Why are we so insistent on its date when the evidence could just as easily suggest something far older? We've built a fortress of answers to protect ourselves from the disquiet of uncertainty. But sometimes, the answers themselves are the lie. Take, for instance, the so-called builder's graffiti in the hidden upper chambers, the red ochre marks supposedly naming Khufu and dating the pyramid to his reign. This single, fragile piece of evidence has been used to validate an entire era of pyramid chronology. And yet, the man who discovered it, Colonel Howard Weiss, was under immense pressure to make his expedition a success. His own journal reveals days of failed attempts to find anything of importance. Then, suddenly, the marks appeared, painted in red, in a chamber no one else had access to, in handwriting that oddly resembled modern script more than ancient glyphs. Forgery has long been whispered. Some Egyptologists even admit it, quietly, in side papers, in footnotes. But the official story remains untouched, because to question it would mean to unravel too much. And still, the pyramid refuses to conform. Its construction baffles even our most advanced engineers. The tolerances in the king's chamber, razor-thin, mathematically flawless, suggest not just effort, but a level of intentionality we don't associate with primitive builders. The placement of the stones, especially the granite blocks hauled from Aswan 500 miles away, implies techniques beyond levers and ropes. Some have proposed that the builders softened the stone with unknown chemicals. Others suggest sonic levitation, as absurd as that might sound. Yet even today, acoustic levitation is a field of scientific study. In Tibet, monks have been observed using drums and trumpets to lift stones. The phenomenon has never been fully explained. It doesn't have to be magic, just forgotten science. But perhaps the most haunting detail is not how the pyramid was built, but what it might contain. There are stories, often dismissed, often silenced, of deep chambers beneath the Giza Plateau, of tunnels stretching for miles under the desert. In 1935, a publication in the Illustrated London News detailed discoveries of underground rooms with strange artifacts found by Egyptian archaeologists. Then, silence. The information was retracted, the researchers reassigned. The site suddenly off-limits. In more recent decades, rumors have re-emerged of sealed doors found deep beneath the Sphinx, of secret excavations conducted quietly by military-backed teams. When the topic is raised with officials, the answer is always the same. There is nothing there. And yet the equipment remains. The guards, the restrictions, the eyes that watch. Why guard nothing? Why deny interest in something you've never explored? Unless something was found, something unsettling. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, the underworld, Duat, was not merely a place of death. It was a realm of hidden knowledge, a place of trial, transformation, and rebirth. The pharaohs prepared for it not with weapons, but with texts, maps of the soul's journey through stars and serpents and gates of fire. Could these have been metaphors, or literal paths encoded into the architecture beneath Giza? It's worth noting that the word pyramid does not appear in the pyramid texts. They refer instead to mounds, to the island of flame, and to the fields of peace. We imposed the Greek word pyramis later, long after the original meanings were lost. The shape itself, to the Egyptians, was called myrrh, a word we still do not fully understand. Some translate it as place of ascension. Others suggest it relates to light. And this brings us to perhaps the most haunting idea of all. What if the pyramid was not built to house the dead, but to preserve something living? Not a person, not a soul, but an idea. A vibration, a frequency, a state of mind. We know that deep meditation can alter the human brain's electrical patterns. That sound can influence emotion, memory, even healing. What if the internal architecture of the pyramid was designed to induce such states? The darkness, the angles, the hum of the stone, all converging to open a door, not outward, but inward. A machine for the spirit, a chamber for transformation. The ancient initiatory traditions spoke of death before rebirth, of descending into darkness to emerge as more than what you were. The Greeks called it katabasis. The Egyptians had their own rites. The Freemasons too preserve whispers of such journeys, and always, always, the pyramid is there, not just as a tomb, but as a symbol, as a threshold, something meant to be experienced, not just seen. But today it is a photo op, a backdrop, a monument to mystery with no permission to speak. Because the moment we allow it to speak, we must confront the possibility that the past is not what we've been told, that our history is fragmented, distorted, weaponized against wonder. The Great Pyramid does not beg for answers. It offers a question, over and over, in every block, in every ratio, in every line of sight that leads from Earth to the stars. What were we before we forgot? To enter the Great Pyramid is to walk not into a monument, but into the absence of explanation. The air shifts, sound behaves strangely. Time somehow feels different. It is not a place built for the living. It is a structure carved into the bones of the earth, not to impress, not even to endure, but to contain, or perhaps to protect. But protect what? We speak of secrets as if they are mere information withheld. But what if the secret of the pyramid is not a fact, but a condition? A threshold of perception? Something that cannot be understood until something within us changes. Why else would its builders leave no text, no instruction, no decoration? We are told this is because the pyramid was built before the tradition of hieroglyphs matured. But that doesn't explain the complete and deliberate silence of its interior. Every wall, every chamber, bare, unadorned. This from a culture that covered tombs and temples with prayers, spells, images of gods and judgment. The pyramid doesn't speak, it resonates. The mystery intensifies when we consider that its design may be based not on aesthetics, but acoustics. Studies of the King's Chamber reveal resonant frequencies that correspond to the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic frequency of the Earth itself. The granite beams in the ceiling aren't structural necessities, they're acoustic filters. This isn't architecture, it's instrumentation. But to what purpose? Some have suggested the pyramid was a kind of healing device, a chamber where the human body could be brought into harmony with the earth. Others believe it was an initiatory portal, designed to simulate death and rebirth through sensory deprivation, vibration, and resonance. Even more radical voices propose it was a kind of energy collector, using Earth's natural frequencies to generate effects we no longer understand. Dismissed by many, yet eerily consistent with myths found around the world. In Vedic traditions, sound is the first element of creation. Nada Brahma, they say. The world is sound. Tibetan monks chant in specific tones meant to alter states of consciousness. The ancients knew something about sound and the body, sound and the soul, sound and space. Did the builders of the pyramid know more? Perhaps the silence inside is not emptiness, but invitation. And yet, for all our studies, we know so little about what lies beneath. Beneath the pyramid, beneath the plateau, beneath the narratives. In 2009, Egyptian authorities denied access to a network of tunnels beneath Giza discovered decades earlier. Some reports speak of sealed shafts, carved stone corridors, and chambers that echo without end. The official story is consistent. Nothing of interest. Dangerous to excavate. No need to proceed. But independent researchers have been quietly gathering testimonies from locals, from old maps, from photographs buried in archives. There are patterns. And the most disturbing point of convergence is this. Beneath the Sphinx, there may be a sealed chamber. Mentioned as far back as the 1940s, surveyed in the 70s, confirmed again in the 90s using ground-penetrating radar. Each time, quietly acknowledged, then denied. Why? Why leave it sealed? Because of preservation? Or because it contains something preservation alone cannot explain? What would it mean if beneath the most iconic statue in history, there existed a room untouched for 10,000 years? Not a pharaoh's tomb, not gold or scrolls, but something else. An artifact, a device, a record. There are those who believe this chamber, the so-called Hall of Records, contains blueprints of human history prior to the flood, star charts, astronomical models, lost sciences, evidence of a time when knowledge wasn't passed from parent to child, but encoded into form and vibration. Not taught, but remembered. It sounds fantastic, until you realize that the mere possibility of it would upend everything. Not just archaeology, but culture, identity, power. Because if we found proof that the pyramids predated the dynastic Egyptians, if we could no longer pretend they were built with copper tools and stone sledges, then we would have to admit that civilization is not a slow ascent from ignorance, but a cycle. That we are not at the beginning of knowledge, but one point on its wheel. And that is terrifying. It forces the question, what else have we misunderstood? The Nazca lines, only visible from the air. The Dogon people of Mali, who knew about the invisible companion star of Sirius long before telescopes. The Mayan calendar, tracking galactic cycles with eerie precision. The more you look, the more you see the same pattern. Ancient peoples with inexplicable knowledge. Not random, not isolated, connected. Through what? Trade, migration, or a shared origin? We are taught that history moves in straight lines, that complexity increases with time, that we have always moved forward. But what if it's not a line? What if it's a wave, a breath, a rise and fall? What if the pyramids are not anomalies in our past, but warnings. We keep asking what they were for. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe we should be asking, why were they left behind? Perhaps they were never meant to be understood by the generation that came next. Maybe they were left in stone because their builders knew the language of light and sound would be forgotten. That texts would burn. That languages would fade. That myths would collapse under the weight of forgetting. But stone survives. The pyramid does not seek to be solved. It endures. It waits. Not because it hides something, but because it is the thing, a question in the shape of a mountain, a monument to memory itself, and memory, once reawakened, never sleeps again. Beneath the weight of history, beneath the sand and stone, beneath the noise of textbooks and the murmur of tour guides, there is a pulse. Slow, steady, silent. Not mechanical, not metaphorical. A presence. Something that doesn't ask to be understood but dares to be remembered. And it echoes most clearly in the places where explanation begins to tremble. Like the Great Pyramid. It's often called a marvel, a miracle of engineering. But miracles, in their truest form, are simply phenomena that refuse to fit inside the cages of our expectations. And the pyramid refuses. Let's talk about the casing stones. Most visitors today see the pyramid as a jagged stack of limestone blocks, crumbling under the weight of centuries. But that's not what it once was. Originally, the entire surface was covered in polished white Tura limestone. Smooth, bright, reflective. It wasn't just a monument. It shone, blindingly. It caught the sun in a way that made it visible for miles in all directions. Sailors on the Mediterranean once called it the Shining Mountain. Others said it reflected the light of the moon like a beacon. But that outer layer is gone now, stripped, dismantled, repurposed for later construction. Earthquakes in the 14th century shook the casing loose, and over time, blocks were carted away to build mosques, palaces, walls. Piece by piece, the skin of the pyramid was stolen, leaving only the skeleton. And yet, the foundation blocks of those casing stones where they remain show an impossible level of precision. Some joints are so tight, even today, that a human hair cannot fit between them, without mortar, without error. What kind of tools, we must ask, could shape thousands of stones to such tolerances? Copper chisels? Wooden sleds? Levers and sweat and sand? We repeat these answers like catechisms, not because they satisfy, but because they are the only ones we're allowed to say aloud. But some have looked closer. Christopher Dunn, an engineer with decades of experience in aerospace and manufacturing, examined several core-drilled stones found at Giza and elsewhere in Egypt. His conclusion was unnerving. The spiral marks and bore patterns indicated the use of high-speed machinery, rotary tools, possibly ultrasonic drills. Not crude, not primitive, but advanced. At a level not seen again until the industrial era. His work has been largely ignored by mainstream archaeology, not disproven, just dismissed. Why? Because if he's right, the implications are devastating to the accepted model of human history. A model built not on what has been found, but on what has been assumed. And assumptions are fragile things. They require reinforcement, repetition, silence. Meanwhile, the evidence waits. Consider the so-called unfinished obelisk in Aswan, still attached to its bedrock, abandoned mid-carve. It's the largest known obelisk ever attempted, over 1,000 tons. That's the weight of more than 140 elephants. Even today, We have no cranes capable of moving it intact. The groove marks along its edge suggest circular tools, not chisels, and the shape is perfect until the crack that doomed its completion. If they couldn't finish it, why were they even trying? Why attempt what could not be done, unless someone once knew how? And then forgot. There is a chilling possibility that repeats itself across the ancient world, that what we call progress is not linear growth, but the flickering of memory. That civilizations do not simply build upward, but rise, fall, and rise again. Each time a little less sure, a little more fragmented, a little further from the source. What if the pyramid was not the beginning, but the echo? An echo of a time when the earth was understood not as territory, but as organism. When architecture was not imposed on the land, but aligned with it. When temples and tombs and towers were not separate from the stars, but part of their design. Look again at the location. The Great Pyramid sits almost exactly at the center of Earth's landmass. It lies at the intersection of the longest lines of latitude and longitude that cross the most land. Not symbolic, not decorative, mathematically precise. Who knew this? And how? Global positioning satellites were invented only decades ago, but the builders of Giza, they knew. Not by chance, not by accident, but by design. And there's more. If you divide the height of the Great Pyramid by its base, you get a close approximation of the golden ratio. Multiply the height by 43,200. You get the polar radius of the Earth. Multiply the perimeter by the same number. You get the planet's equatorial circumference. This scale, 43,200, isn't arbitrary. It mirrors the cycle of axial precession, 25,720 years divided by 6. Coincidence? Perhaps. But how many coincidences does it take to form a pattern? And how many patterns must we ignore before we admit we're afraid of the answer? Because if the builders knew the dimensions of the Earth, the motion of the stars, the resonance of sound, and the vibrational properties of stone, then they weren't building for death. They were building for knowledge. They were encoding something not meant for their time, but for a time when memory would fracture, when silence would overtake speech, when myth would replace truth. Maybe that time is ours. And maybe we were meant to rediscover what they left behind, not through conquest, but through resonance, through listening. Because the pyramid doesn't speak in words. It speaks in alignments, in proportions, in vibration. And somewhere in that silence, deeper than stone, older than empire, a question remains. What kind of civilization builds a mountain of light only to vanish without a name? Somewhere between shadow and structure, between myth and stone, the Great Pyramid continues to ask a question no one has fully dared to answer. It doesn't whisper. It waits. With each block laid with inhuman precision, with each angle carved into cosmic relevance, it resists our efforts to reduce it to a monument of mere ambition, because ambition decays. But this endures. And endurance always has intent. We measure history by dates carved into timelines, dynasties, reigns, battles, collapses. But the pyramid isn't measured by time. It ignores time. It dwarfs it. What kind of structure stands through earthquakes, floods, wars, and empires, and still keeps perfect alignment with the stars? What kind of knowledge constructs for eternity? And more chilling, what kind of silence allows that knowledge to be forgotten? Because in truth, the pyramid's greatest mystery isn't just how it was built, but why the world refuses to see it for what it is. Consider this. There are no mummies in the Great Pyramid. None were ever found. No hieroglyphs, no religious inscriptions, no artwork, not a single image of a pharaoh, and yet it's still labeled a tomb. Why? Because the alternative is too destabilizing. The Great Pyramid breaks the rules. It doesn't belong in the timeline we've written for ourselves. It doesn't follow the pattern of technological evolution. It offers a version of the past that doesn't start with caves and candles, but with stars and stone and silence. And that's threatening, not to knowledge, but to control. Because if the timeline is wrong, then the story is wrong. And if the story is wrong, who wrote it? Let's go back to the alignment. The pyramid's orientation to true north is within 0.05 degrees of perfection, more accurate than most modern buildings. It doesn't point to magnetic north. It aligns to true astronomical north. With no compass, no satellites, no advanced optics. Not only that, but the angles of the pyramid reflect the curvature of the Earth. If you take the base perimeter and divide it by twice the height, you get a value close to P. If you use a different ratio, you approach the golden ratio. Three mathematical constants, pi, phi, and the equatorial scale of the Earth, encoded into one structure. That's not accident, that's design. And yet, we're told the builders had no concept of these numbers, that they simply stumbled into divine geometry through generations of trial and error. But the pyramid doesn't bear the marks of trial. It has no experimental predecessors. Its design didn't evolve. It arrived whole, complete, the first of its kind, and also the best. What kind of civilization begins with its masterpiece? What kind of intelligence moves backward from brilliance? Unless, perhaps, it didn't begin here. Perhaps it remembered. This possibility has haunted researchers who stand too long in the king's chamber. They speak not of ghosts, but of presence, a density in the air, a hum in the bones. The room itself vibrates, not audibly, but physically. Frequencies seem to settle into the body. Some report headaches, others clarity, a few fear. The chamber is a resonator, but for what? We know that materials like granite contain quartz, a piezoelectric mineral. When vibrated, it emits electrical charges. The granite beams above the king's chamber could, in theory, amplify or direct such energy. Add to that the pyramid's location, over underground aquifers, where moving water generates electromagnetic fields, and you begin to see something else. Not a tomb, a device, or a kind of archive, one that stores not data but frequency. What if memory wasn't just ink and language? What if knowledge could be encoded in vibration, in shape, in sound? We already know that frequency can alter matter. Cymatics, the study of how sound frequencies affect physical substances, reveals stunning geometric patterns formed by simple tones. The ancients may have known this, not abstractly, but intuitively. Their temples weren't places of worship as we understand it. They were instruments. And the Great Pyramid? It may be the greatest of them all. Some have theorized that it could function like a planetary tuning fork, drawing energy from the Earth and the stars, resonating with the human body, unlocking dormant capacities in the mind. Not magic, not fantasy, just a physics we no longer speak. Imagine a structure built to remember what the world forgot, to stand through cataclysm, to wait until the ones who built it, or the ones like them, returned. This idea is not new. In Egyptian lore, the gods did not die. They withdrew. They retreated into the Duat, the unseen realm. Not destroyed, just inaccessible. But they left instructions, symbols, gates, challenges, and among them, the greatest, was a structure that could not be moved, could not be erased, and could not be easily understood. What if the pyramid is not a monument to death, but to memory? What if it holds not a body, but a blueprint? A blueprint of what came before, or what is coming again, because something else lives in the shadow of Giza, a sense of recurrence. The stars above the plateau are not fixed. They cycle, they return. The alignment with Orion's belt, the celestial signature of the pyramids, was most precise in 10,500 BCE. And it will be again. What happens then? Will the chambers open? Will the frequencies shift? Will we finally remember? Or will we once more turn away? We stand at the threshold of rediscovery. The pieces are there. The geometry, the astronomy, the acoustics, the placement. We have the technology now to look deeper, to test, to measure. But something holds us back. Not inability, unwillingness. Because to truly explore the pyramid is to admit we don't know, to allow mystery, to accept that others, long before us, knew something we do not. And that kind of humility is dangerous to pride. So instead, we label, we photograph, we tour. But the pyramid doesn't care, it waits. As it has always waited. Not for answers, for questions. Real ones. The kind that open more than minds. The kind that open doors. The closer we get to the Great Pyramid, the more it recedes from us. Not in distance, but in certainty. It's like a reflection in black water, solid from afar, elusive when touched. We measure its base, calculate its angles, test its materials, but we cannot name its purpose. Not conclusively, not without contradiction. And in that ambiguity, something darker stirs. Because it's not just what the pyramid might be, it's what it implies. If the Great Pyramid is older than the dynasties, if it was built with techniques we cannot replicate, if it encodes knowledge we only recently rediscovered, then the history we've inherited is not simply incomplete. It's been curated. Curated by whom? That question often brings discomfort. We like to believe that history is a record, not a narrative, that it unfolds like a book, each page turning naturally into the next. But history, as we receive it, is not neutral. It is a construction. A map drawn after the land has already shifted. And when it comes to Egypt, that map has missing cities. In the 19th century, European explorers entered Egypt with more than curiosity. They came with empires in their pockets. What they didn't understand, they translated. What they couldn't date, they dismissed. What they couldn't explain, they redefined. That pattern continues. Archaeology, we are told, is a science. And in many ways it is. But it is also a story, one shaped by funding, politics, institutional consensus. Discoveries that support the dominant timeline are celebrated. Those that don't? Ignored. Or buried. Sometimes literally. The Serapeum of Saqqara is one such example. A dark underground network of tunnels, carved into bedrock, housing over 20 massive stone boxes, each made of precision-carved granite, weighing over 70 tons, with polished surfaces and tight angular tolerances. Egyptologists say they were sarcophagi for the sacred Apis bulls. But there are problems. The boxes are too large to fit through the tunnels unless placed before excavation. The interior polish is almost mirror-like, the angles machined to a precision of fractions of a millimeter. Who carved them? With what tools? How were they transported? Why are there no inscriptions, no decorations, no offerings, nothing that marks them as tombs? What if they weren't tombs at all? Engineers who've studied the boxes often describe them not in funerary terms, but in technological ones. They resemble components, resonant chambers, storage units, not for bulls, but for something else entirely. Vibrations, energy, sound? We don't know, but their presence raises an uncomfortable truth. Whoever made them had capabilities beyond our accepted timeline. And the Serapeum isn't alone. At Abu Rawash, the so-called Pyramid of Giza once stood, now ruined, almost erased. But early photographs suggest it may have rivaled the Great Pyramid in complexity. At Zawiat el-Arian, another buried structure, known as the Unfinished Pyramid, has a massive granite box at its core, submerged in a subterranean chamber filled with water. It has never been fully excavated. Why? Why are the sites that most challenge the conventional story the ones we're told not to look at too closely? It's here the idea of suppression begins to take root. Not as conspiracy, but as reluctance. A quiet agreement among institutions to protect the narrative, to avoid chaos, to preserve authority. But truth doesn't ask permission, it persists. And stone doesn't lie. The anomalies accumulate. Core drill holes in granite with spiral grooves too deep for copper tools. Obelisks balanced on narrow bases, unshakable. Pyramids in China, some larger than Giza, still forbidden from excavation. Underwater structures off the coasts of India and Japan, submerged beneath millennia of ocean. These are not theories, these are real, and yet they remain on the margins. Not because they lack evidence, but because they lack acceptance. But the Great Pyramid does not care whether it is accepted. It exists. And in its existence, it accuses. It asks us why we are so desperate to shrink it into the tomb of a king. Is it because the alternative is unbearable? That once, long ago, a civilization walked this earth with knowledge we do not have? That they were not primitives climbing toward wisdom, but stewards of something we've since lost? That the flood myths are not metaphors, but memories? What would that mean for us? We live in a time that worships progress, that sees the present as superior simply because it is later. But the Great Pyramid doesn't bow to chronology. It suggests that time is not a ladder, but a loop. That memory, when lost, returns not as knowledge, but as intuition, as longing, as myth. And maybe that's why we dream of Atlantis, of Lemuria, of the first time. Maybe it's not fantasy, maybe it's recall. Deep cellular recall, like a scar beneath the skin of our species. And maybe the pyramid was left not just to preserve knowledge, but to reactivate it. To call back what we once were. Not just technologically, but spiritually. Because no matter how many formulas we apply, no matter how many tools we model, the pyramid resists full mechanistic explanation. Its proportions encode the cosmos. Its chambers echo with harmonics. Its stones respond to touch, to sound, to silence. It is not just engineered, it is tuned. And the more we try to quantify it, the more it whispers something older than language. Remember, not the facts, not the dates, but the vibration, the alignment, the purpose. And in the end, perhaps that is the real reason the pyramid endures, not to prove who built it, or how, or when, but to remind us what it means to build for eternity. To leave behind not a name but a question, and to trust that one day someone would come not to solve it, but to feel it. Some monuments are made to be seen, others to be entered. But the Great Pyramid, perhaps the most enigmatic structure ever built, feels as though it was made to be felt, not just in its scale or geometry, but in its stillness. It doesn't speak loudly. It presses in, like a memory that never belonged to you but somehow knows your name. A memory too vast to hold in the mind, yet too persistent to forget. And the deeper you go, into its chambers, its history, its silence, the clearer it becomes. This is not just a building. This is a boundary. Between the known and the forgotten, between the physical and the symbolic, between us and them. Whoever they were. We say Egyptians, as if it answers more than it avoids, as if placing a familiar name on a mystery makes it less uncomfortable. But the truth is, no inscriptions inside the Great Pyramid tie it to any known pharaoh with certainty. No tomb artifacts, no funerary texts. Just a single disputed cartouche, hidden in a chamber no one was meant to enter. Discovered by an explorer whose own credibility was questioned even in his own time. It's not enough. Not for something like this. Not for a structure whose builders seem to have known the speed of light, the dimensions of the planet, the precession of the stars, and the language of resonance. A structure whose perfection shames our most advanced efforts. Think of that. We cannot rebuild it. Not with today's tools. Not with today's logistics. Not without astronomical resources, international cooperation, and decades of planning. And even then, we're not sure we could match its scale, its precision, or its resilience. Yet we're told that a society without iron, without pulleys, without wheels, managed it, using copper chisels and slave labor. What if the story itself is a kind of amnesia? A wound we've dressed with simple explanations because the alternative is unbearable. And what is that alternative? That the pyramid predates history. That it was not built by Egyptians, but inherited by them, already ancient in their time. That it survived some cataclysm, some civilizational collapse, and remained, like a spine in the earth, waiting to be rediscovered. Many ancient traditions speak of a first time, a golden age when gods and men lived side by side. In Egypt, it's Zep Tepi. In Sumer, it's the reign of the Anunnaki. In India, the Satya Yuga. The details vary, but the arc is always the same. Great knowledge, great harmony, great fall. And afterward? A forgetting. Not total, not immediate, but creeping. Like dusk. Those who remembered tried to preserve fragments, stories, symbols, star maps. Some turned mythic, others turned to stone. The Great Pyramid may be the last and most complete of those efforts, not just to preserve information, but to encode it, to safeguard it from flood, fire, and forgetting. It's not just a container of knowledge, it is knowledge cast into geometry. We understand so little of what it does, even now. In 2017, a previously unknown void was detected above the Grand Gallery, using cosmic ray muon detection. A chamber, at least 30 meters long, hidden in the heart of the structure. No access tunnels, no known entrance, just space, sealed, waiting. What's in it? We don't know. We haven't looked. Not really. Why not? Because to open it would mean facing what's inside, and we're not ready. Not for something that might rewrite everything. Consider that possibility for a moment. that something inside the Great Pyramid is meant not for the people of its time, but for us. Now, a time when we can measure with lasers, scan with satellites, simulate with quantum computers. A time when we're finally capable, technologically, of seeing what we couldn't before. But are we capable culturally? Are we brave enough to confront the idea that we are not the pinnacle, but the aftermath? The inheritors of fragments? It would change more than our history books. It would shift our identity, our place in the long spiral of time. We would no longer be the first to reach the summit. We would be the ones struggling to remember the path others once walked with clarity. And that shift, that humility, may be the very thing the pyramid was meant to awaken. Because the Great Pyramid is not merely mysterious, it's mirroring. It shows us not just what we've lost, but what we fear to reclaim. A world that didn't separate science and spirit. A world that saw the earth not as resource, but as organism. A world that encoded memory not in words, but in vibration. A world where architecture wasn't static. It sang. This might sound like poetry, but even our modern sciences whisper agreement. Acoustic engineers confirm the King's Chamber responds to specific frequencies. Geologists find that the pyramid's base remains level within fractions of an inch, despite millennia of seismic activity. Astronomers still marvel at its stellar alignments, precise beyond the margin of error for a Bronze Age society. It is not myth that clings to the pyramid. It is precision, intent, design. So then, what do we do with it? Continue to label it a tomb, though it has no body? A symbol of power, though it outlasted the empire it supposedly glorified? A wonder, without wondering? Or do we listen, not just to the theories, but to the structure itself, to the way it sits in silence, to the way it resists decay, to the way it reminds us that something vast, something wise, once walked this earth and left behind a monument not to be worshipped, but to be remembered. Perhaps that is why it endures, not as a mystery to be solved, but as a truth we must grow into. The desert keeps its secrets not by hiding them, but by overwhelming us with silence, an unyielding stillness that makes us question whether what we thought we knew was ever real at all. That's the kind of silence that surrounds the Great Pyramid, not emptiness, not absence, a deeper kind of quiet, a silence that listens back. We've tried to answer the pyramid with categories, with architectural labels, with construction theories and dynastic assumptions, but the more we try to box it in, the more it escapes. Because the pyramid doesn't explain itself in human terms. It's not designed to satisfy. It's designed to endure. And endurance, when you really look at it, is a form of memory. Let's talk about water. It's a detail easily overlooked, yet deeply revealing. Beneath the Giza Plateau, under the hard, dry ground we associate with desert eternity, lies an aquifer system, flowing water beneath the bedrock, subterranean currents beneath the monuments. This has long been known, but rarely discussed. Why? Because water conducts energy, and moving water, especially through certain types of rock, can generate an electromagnetic field. Some researchers believe this isn't incidental, it's integral, that the pyramid was not just built on this location, but because of it. If so, then we must ask, was the pyramid designed to interact with the Earth itself? In 2018, Russian physicists modeled how electromagnetic waves behave when interacting with the pyramid's shape. The results were astonishing. Under specific conditions, resonant frequencies, the Great Pyramid acts as an energy funnel, concentrating electromagnetic waves into its internal chambers. The model showed amplification effects not only vertically, but into the very chamber long believed to be its center of power. The King's Chamber. These are not fringe ideas. These are peer-reviewed studies. But still, silence. Because if the pyramid was designed to interact with energy, then it isn't a tomb. It isn't a monument to death. It's something else entirely. A machine? A transmitter? A stabilizer? We don't know. And that not knowing makes us uncomfortable. So we default to the myth of the pharaoh, the limestone ramp, the funerary cult. Safer to say we don't have the tools they used than to ask if the tools never existed in the first place. Safer to claim symbolism than to admit we may be looking at a technology that transcends what we call modern. But the pyramid does not ask for safety. It invites transformation, and perhaps that's what terrifies us most. What happens to a civilization when it confronts a memory it isn't prepared to inherit? Because if the pyramid encodes energy, if its internal design and external placement are meant to harmonize with the planet's magnetic fields, its orbital mechanics, its cosmic alignments, then it is not a structure. It is a system, part of something larger, something global. And if that's true, then it's not alone. Consider the megalithic sites across the Earth. Teotihuacan aligned to the Pleiades, Stonehenge tracking solstices, Angkor Wat laid out as a mirror of the Draco constellation. Even Mount Meru in ancient Buddhist cosmology, the world axis, echoed in the temple of Borobudur. Different cultures, different languages, same obsession. Stars, angles, stone. Was this shared symbolism or shared science? Mainstream archaeology explains it away as coincidence or archetypal psychology. That human beings, across time and space, naturally constructed in relation to the heavens. But what if it wasn't psychological? What if it was inherited? A faint recollection of a civilization before the flood, before the ice melted, before history began as we know it. A civilization that understood the Earth not just as geography, but as resonance, that built in alignment, not just to the sun and stars, but to each other. A network, global, intentional, ancient. And maybe, just maybe, the Great Pyramid was the keystone of that network. Not just the largest, the last. Think again of its design. No mortar in the joints, blocks fitted so precisely they seem to fuse. A shape that resists earthquake, erosion, entropy. It's as if it was meant to survive a storm, not of weather, but of time. And the storm did come. We call it the Younger Dryas. Around 12,800 years ago, a sudden sharp decline in global temperatures, massive flooding, megafaunal extinction, and the near disappearance of any culture advanced enough to leave a trace. Some scientists now believe it was caused by a fragmented comet, an impact event, a sky fire that shattered memory itself. If this is true, if a previous civilization did exist, then its last act may have been to preserve what it could in forms that could not be lost. Myths, stone, sound. Not to save themselves, to save the idea of themselves. Because memory, like sound, needs something to carry it. And stone carries. The Great Pyramid may be that vessel. Not of bones, but of principles. It does not tell us what they knew. It shows us how they remembered, through ratios, through symmetry, through placement. The language is subtle but persistent. A base perimeter encoding Earth's circumference, a height ratio encoding Earth's polar radius, internal shafts pointing not to random stars, but to Sirius and Orion, gods in Egyptian myth, markers in the precession cycle, fixed points in a sky that shifts over millennia. Nothing is arbitrary. Everything speaks, but we have forgotten how to listen. Or perhaps, more accurately, we've forgotten that we can. Because to listen would mean admitting that someone, somewhere, long before the Egyptians, knew things we have only recently begun to rediscover. That the arrow of progress is not straight, that civilizations can rise, fall, and rise again, that knowledge can die, and still be waiting to be born again in stone. So the pyramid waits, not to be solved, to be felt, to be resonated with, as a tuning fork struck against the hollow shell of our certainty. It asks us nothing directly, but in its presence we begin to ask different questions. Not who built it, not how was it constructed, but what kind of world made this necessary? And what kind of people are we if we continue to look at it and refuse to remember? Not all monuments are built to be admired, some are built to be found, long after memory dies, long after the hands that placed the first stone have turned to dust, long after language forgets the shape of its own origin. The Great Pyramid stands not as a celebration of what was, but as a witness to what will be forgotten, or perhaps to what must be remembered. And yet we treat it like a museum piece, a leftover curiosity from a world we believe we understand. We tour it, photograph it, explain it away in documentaries. But the pyramid doesn't yield to explanation. It absorbs it silently, patiently, as if it knows that the truth cannot be forced. It must be remembered. And memory, when buried too deep, begins to bleed into myth. Across the globe, that bleeding is evident. In Polynesian chants of star ancestors, in Norse sagas of a sunken world, in Hopi stories of previous worlds lost to fire, ice, and flood, and in the persistent, almost pathological human obsession with pyramids, structures that appear on every continent, from China to Sudan to Central America, always monumental, always aligned, always older than expected. Why? Why would disparate cultures, separated by oceans and epochs, build such similar forms? Coincidence is a comfortable answer. But comfort is not truth, and if we set coincidence aside, even for a moment, then another possibility appears. One that demands something of us, that the pyramid form is not just symbolic, but functional, that it does something, not only energetically or acoustically, but cognitively, that it is a shape we once understood in the bones and have since forgotten in the mind. The very geometry of a pyramid, with its square base and 4 triangular faces rising to a point, creates energetic convergence. It gathers, focuses, and releases. In ancient cosmology, the pyramid represented the primordial mound, rising from the waters of chaos, a stable center around which order could form. This wasn't metaphor. It was architecture as cosmology, matter shaped by myth, or perhaps myth shaped by memory of matter. And if the Great Pyramid was the apex of that idea, then it wasn't meant to be unique. It was meant to be central, a node in something larger, something we no longer see. Satellite images of the Giza Plateau have revealed formations, regular, angular, linear, that suggest man-made features buried under centuries of sediment. Not random, but arranged, patterns consistent with city planning. But no excavation has followed. No headlines, just silence, as if some part of us fears what might be unearthed. Because if Giza wasn't just a burial site, but a complex, a center of energy, ritual, transmission, then we must revise everything, the history, the purpose, the model of civilization itself. But revision is dangerous when the current model gives comfort, when it lets us place ourselves at the peak of the pyramid, rather than among its scattered base. We claim to know so much, and yet the Great Pyramid is still cooling. Deep in its core, thermographic scans show temperature anomalies. Certain stones radiate differently than others, not just surface shifts, not exposure, something internal, some form of stored energy, a sealed chamber, a material we don't yet recognize. Again, no further study has been allowed. Why? Is it fear of what we'll find? Or of what we won't? Because the most unsettling possibility is not that we'll find proof of a forgotten civilization. It's that we'll find nothing at all. That the pyramid is not a vault, but a reminder, a physical koan, an artifact of presence without explanation, a monument not to knowledge, but to knowing. And that, more than anything, breaks the pattern of history we've been taught to believe. Because we've been told that civilization is linear, that knowledge grows, that the past is always behind us, simpler, cruder, dimmer. But what if knowledge contracts as often as it expands? What if civilizations don't climb steadily but breathe? Rise, collapse, remember, forget. And what if the Great Pyramid was built not at the beginning of something, but at the end? An epitaph written in the only language the flood couldn't erase. Stone. Even its dimensions hint at this. The number 144,000 is embedded in its measurements, a number that appears again and again in religious texts, in time cycles, in calendars. The ancient Egyptians revered harmonic numbers, solar rhythms, sidereal cycles. All of it built into the pyramid's proportions. This wasn't guesswork. This wasn't art, it was function. And we're only just starting to see its edges. The pyramid isn't trying to tell us a story. It's trying to restore a frequency. A resonance lost when the world changed. Suddenly, violently. Not just climatically, but cognitively. There is growing evidence, from genetic studies, archaeological anomalies, and oral traditions, that something traumatic happened to humanity at the end of the last ice age. A break, a bottleneck, a wound. We call it the Younger Dryas, but our ancestors remembered it as the deluge, the fall, the great night. Afterward, knowledge became myth, science became magic, and memory became sacred. And the pyramid? It stood. It endured when everything else washed away. And now it asks the only question that matters. Are we ready to remember? Not in data, in presence. Not through conquest, through alignment. Because maybe the pyramid wasn't built to be studied. Maybe it was built to be experienced. To sit in silence inside the king's chamber, where the walls don't echo, but absorb. To feel the hum beneath your feet. To listen. Not for sound, but for something deeper. A kind of listening we've forgotten. The kind that opens not the mind, but the soul. And when that happens, when something inside you responds, not with answers, but with longing, you begin to see. The pyramid was never a riddle to be solved. It was an invitation. And the moment we stop trying to explain it, we might finally start to remember. There's a moment, brief but unmistakable, when you stand before the Great Pyramid and all explanations fall away. The tour guides vanish into background noise, the cameras lower, and you become aware of something else. Not wonder, not awe, something quieter, something older. The sense that you're not merely looking at the past, but that the past is looking back. This is not imagination. It is architecture designed not just to endure, but to confront. A message from a vanished world, written in mass and alignment and silence. One that doesn't tell you what to think, but slowly unravels what you thought you knew. Because the pyramid does not just challenge engineering. It challenges time itself. We're told that it was built around 2560 BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. But every stone resists this story. The evidence is circumstantial at best. A handful of markings in a chamber hidden for thousands of years, and even those, questioned, disputed, possibly forged. No other structure in history has had its identity built on so little, and yet been defended with such force. Why? Because the alternative isn't just inconvenient. It's revolutionary. If the pyramid predates the dynastic Egyptians, it rewrites the timeline of civilization. It implies that there was an era, before the pharaohs, before writing, before recorded memory, when knowledge flourished. A forgotten epoch of builders, astronomers, engineers, whose fingerprints remain only in stone. But there are more than fingerprints. There are echoes. In 1993, a team using advanced radar detected a series of cavities beneath the Sphinx and nearby plateau. Subsurface voids, chambers perhaps, cut deep into the limestone bedrock. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities quickly moved to restrict further scanning. The site was declared off-limits. No explanation. No exploration. Just a sealed silence. Why? What is buried beneath? Some say a library. Others, a vault of objects meant to survive the end of an age. The so-called Hall of Records described in esoteric traditions. Not myth, perhaps, but memory, encoded in allegory, preserved in structure. And still the question lingers. Why bury knowledge? Perhaps because it wasn't meant for all time, only for a specific one. A moment far ahead, when humanity would return to the edge of something vast. When our tools would once again allow us to listen, to look deeper, to remember. Maybe that moment is now. We're approaching the limits of our current knowledge. Physics is splintering into paradox. Biology is grappling with consciousness. Time, once thought linear, is now bending in quantum fields. The ancient world spoke of cycles, yugas, ages, suns that rise and fall like tides. What if those cycles aren't metaphor? What if we're nearing the same turning the builders once faced? And what if they built the pyramid not to survive it, but to guide us through it? The idea seems far-fetched until you look again at its numbers. The Great Pyramid is more than precise. It is mathematical poetry. The perimeter divided by the height gives 2p. The square base and the golden ratio slope speak in geometry that mirrors life itself. Everything from sunflower spirals to spiral galaxies echo this ratio. The structure does not just mimic nature, it mirrors it. What kind of builders possess that kind of understanding? What kind of civilization encodes universal constants into architecture? Certainly not one that was primitive. Certainly not one that simply vanished without reason. And yet, history offers us nothing to bridge the gap. No records of tools capable of such precision, no scaffolding remnants, no transitional forms, just the pyramid, complete, imposing, isolated, like a symphony found in the desert, with no trace of an orchestra. We explain away this absence as mystery, anomaly, or overestimation. But the stones remain, untouched, unmoved. Each block a stubborn syllable in a language we no longer speak. So perhaps it's time we stop translating the pyramid into our terms, and begin to let it translate us, because that may have always been its purpose, to create an experience so profound, so dissonant with ordinary time, that it activates something long dormant within us, a sensation, a resonance, not unlike standing at the edge of a vast sea you cannot see, but feel, and knowing that once, long ago, you came from it. Ancient texts speak of living stone, of buildings that held memory, that could sing, that could awaken. We laugh at such ideas now, but our ancestors didn't. They shaped their cities as mandalas, their temples as star maps, their lives as stories written in architecture. They believed that place and mind were reflections. And the Great Pyramid? It may be the most profound mirror ever built, not because it reflects us as we are, but as we were, and maybe as we will be again. Which brings us to the most unsettling thought of all. What if the Great Pyramid is not only older than we believe, but also unfinished? Not in stone, but in meaning. What if its message changes depending on who encounters it? What if it contains layers like a code, meant to unlock only when we reach a certain threshold of understanding? We treat knowledge as static. But what if it's relational? What if the pyramid is a teacher, not of facts, but of memory? And what if it waits, not for discovery, but for resonance? You don't solve a temple like this. You enter it, you sit in it, you feel the silence, the angles, the breath of stone pressing in. You hear the hum that has no source, the echo that has no voice. And in that moment something old stirs, not from the pyramid, from you, from the part of you that remembers building it, or standing beside those who did, or inheriting the stories before language fell apart. And if you listen closely enough, not with ears, but with presence, you might realize the pyramid is not asking us to look backward. It's asking us to prepare. Because what was, maybe again, and what was left behind in stone, was never a monument to the past. It was a map to the future. We often think of stone as mute, as lifeless, as something passive, inert. But the ancients didn't think so. To them, stone was not dead. It was eternal. It held energy, vibration, memory. It was a witness. And some stones, they believed, were chosen, not for size, not for strength, but for what they could hold. And perhaps that's why the Great Pyramid still stands, not just because it was built to last, but because it was built to remember. Everything about it resists erosion, not just the physical kind, the erosion of meaning, of purpose, of context, the kind of erosion that swallows entire civilizations in silence. Yet the pyramid remains, and every time we try to interpret it through our modern lens, it seems to look back at us and ask simply, "Are you sure? 'Cause what if it's not we who study the pyramid, but the pyramid that studies us?" Think about it. This is a structure placed at the exact geodetic center of the Earth's landmass. Its dimensions encode the curvature of the planet, the speed of light, and time cycles as vast as the precession of the equinoxes. it is aligned more precisely than any other man-made structure in history. And its interior geometry is tuned to resonant frequencies that affect both the body and the mind. That's not coincidence. That's calibration. We have no texts that explain this, no inscriptions, no records of tools or plans or architects, just the thing itself, standing, waiting, as if the act of explanation was unnecessary or impossible. And yet it is not alone. In the Valley Temple near the Sphinx, we find massive limestone and granite blocks, some weighing more than 100 tons, fitted together with precision equal to that of modern stone machining. The same uncanny precision is found at Baalbek in Lebanon, at Ollantaytambo and Sacsayhuaman in Peru. Different regions, different cultures, different millennia. Same method, same mystery. Were they connected? And if so, by what? There are no direct records of contact, no boats recovered, no shared languages. But there are patterns, strange, persistent patterns, that suggest something deeper than trade or conquest. An inheritance, a shared template passed not through time, but through remembering. Symbols repeat, myths overlap, structures align, not just with each other, but with the stars. And this celestial patterning, this obsession with orientation, doesn't just decorate the architecture, it defines it. In the Great Pyramid, narrow shafts extend from the internal chambers, not randomly, but at precise angles, aimed at specific stars, Orion's Belt, Sirius, Thuban. These were not merely decorative details. These were guides, celestial anchors. Why? Because in the ancient world view, the stars were not distant suns. They were homes, destinations. The soul, after death, was said to ascend to the imperishable stars. The pyramid wasn't a tomb. It was a launch pad, a portal, a structure designed not for the body, but for the soul. What does that mean to us now? Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. We've become accustomed to thinking of monuments as expressions of ego, built by kings to immortalize themselves. But the pyramid holds no such vanity, no statue of Khufu, no boastful inscription, just scale, alignment, silence. It's as if it wasn't built to impress. It was built to preserve. Not just itself, but something within us. And if that's true, then what we call lost knowledge may not be lost at all. It may be dormant, waiting for the right frequency, the right resonance, the right question. Because the pyramid doesn't teach in facts. It teaches in form. Its proportions reflect cosmic ratios. Its structure mirrors the harmonic relationships found in nature. Phi, pi, the Fibonacci sequence, the geometry of shells, galaxies, even human DNA. All of it encoded in stone. Not theory. Presence. And there's a reason we keep returning to it, again and again, as a species. Tourists, scholars, pilgrims, filmmakers, engineers. No other ancient structure holds us like this. Not for what it tells us, but for what it refuses to tell. It creates a gap, and in that gap, the imagination steps in. But sometimes imagination is memory, dressed in wonder. Some researchers believe the Great Pyramid might be part of a global system of ancient energy sites, each one positioned along telluric lines, or Earth's subtle energy grid, a kind of planetary acupuncture. Stone nodes placed not to control, but to balance, to harmonize. It would explain the scale, the precision, the obsession with location. And if true, it means the pyramid isn't just about Egypt. It's about the Earth. A tool not for dominance, but for stewardship. A gift left behind not to elevate a king, but to remind a people. And perhaps that reminder is more urgent now than ever. We stand at the edge of transformation. Technological, ecological, psychological, and yet we are disconnected from our ancestors, from the Earth, from ourselves. But the pyramid doesn't change. It waits, not to be discovered, but to be understood. And that understanding cannot come through analysis alone. It must come through alignment, to sit in its chamber, to hear the silence, to feel the weight of 1,000 tons above your head and realize it is balanced, perfectly, still, unmoving, while the world outside shifts and shudders and forgets. That is the lesson. That is the threshold. Because maybe the builders weren't trying to tell us who they were. Maybe they were asking us, who are you when you remember this? Somewhere deep inside the stone lungs of the Great Pyramid, there is a room that holds no name. No pharaoh sleeps there. No relic rests in dust. It is neither a throne room nor a tomb. It simply exists, carved in total darkness, perfectly balanced, precisely aligned. No one knows why it's there, but once you enter, you understand. It wasn't meant to be seen. It was meant to be felt. The king's chamber. Not a place of death, but of transition. Not final, but threshold. Its proportions mirror the golden ratio. The granite blocks that line it hum with frequencies we're only beginning to measure. The air inside doesn't echo. It absorbs. Engineers say it's a resonance chamber. Mystics say it's a chamber of initiation. And maybe both are right. Maybe it's not a room at all, but a tuning device. Not for sound, for consciousness. Because standing inside it is like being inside a question that forgot how to end. And maybe that's the point. We're conditioned to demand answers, to name, define, close the loop. But the pyramid doesn't offer conclusions. It offers doorways, each carefully hidden in geometry, in astronomy, in the quiet refusal to explain itself. It wasn't designed to end a story. It was designed to begin one we were meant to remember. But remembering is dangerous. It shakes foundations, not just of history, but of identity. If the pyramid is more than a tomb, more than a royal vanity project, then what else have we misunderstood? If this monument, built with a level of precision still unmatched, encodes Earth's geodetic constants, stellar alignments, and principles of wave resonance, then who or what was it truly built for? And why has so much effort gone into explaining it away? This isn't conspiracy, it's a pattern. Throughout the modern study of Egyptology, there's been an unspoken rule. Anything that suggests advanced knowledge beyond the accepted timeline must be dismissed, discredited, or ignored. Not disproven, just filed away as coincidence or mysticism. Even when new data surfaces, like the 2017 discovery of the massive void above the Grand Gallery, scientists quickly moved to redefine it as a constructural necessity. No attempt was made to explore it further. Because to open that space might open something far more unsettling. The possibility that the story we tell about human civilization is incomplete by design. And if so, who benefits from keeping it that way? Perhaps no one. Perhaps it isn't about malevolence, but fear. The fear of having to start over. Because if we accept that the pyramid wasn't built by the Egyptians, at least not alone, not without some prior legacy, then the neat line of progress we use to measure ourselves breaks. And suddenly, the past is no longer behind us. It's underneath us, buried, forgotten, but not gone. Like the ancient blocks at the Osirian, fitted with such tight precision that modern masons still struggle to explain how they were cut. Or the platform at Baalbek, home to the largest megalithic stones on Earth, some weighing over 1,000 tons. Moved somehow, lifted somehow, placed in perfect alignment. The more you look, the more you find that the impossible is not the exception. It's the rule. So why the silence? Why does the Great Pyramid, perhaps the most thoroughly studied structure in human history, remain fundamentally mysterious? Because it was never built to tell us what we already know. It was built to disrupt the illusion, to remind us of something older than chronology, older than empires, older than kings and borders and dates in stone. It was built to embody a principle, a frequency, a memory that predates language. And in that memory is a warning, because every civilization that reaches the point we are now approaching, full of technology, disconnection, and entropy, will face the same question. Can we remember fast enough? Not intellectually, but soulfully, structurally, in the way we build, in the way we listen, in the way we honor time. Not as a line, but as a breath encoded in the dimensions of the pyramid, in the 43,200 scale model of the Earth, in the shafts that point to Orion, the soul's destination in ancient Egyptian cosmology, in the golden ratios and perfect angles and mysteries sealed beneath layers of stone we've only begun to detect. What if the pyramid is not merely old, but awake? What if it responds? Some who've stood in its chambers say they feel watched. Others feel clarity. Some experience nausea, dizziness, time distortion. Could this be suggestion? Psychology? Or is it the structure doing exactly what it was built to do? To catalyze, to shift, to awaken something dormant inside those who come not to conquer it with answers, but to surrender to its questions. And there's one question, unspoken but ever-present, echoing through its mass, its precision, its refusal to decay. What if this was never meant for those who came before? What if it was always meant for those who came after? Us. Now, at the turning, at the edge of forgetting or remembering, at the place where silence becomes meaning, and meaning becomes the map. So we step in, and we listen, and the stone begins to speak, not in words, but in rhythm, and we begin to remember, not facts, but patterns. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that was always the design. It's strange how something so massive can vanish from our awareness. We've built our world around the Great Pyramid, mapped it, measured it, modeled it, and yet we don't see it. Not truly. Because to truly see it would mean breaking something inside us, a certainty, a sequence, a belief that time only flows forward and that we, here, now, stand at the peak of all that came before. But the pyramid doesn't rise like a mountain to be conquered. It descends into meaning, into memory. And as you descend into its inner chambers, as the air thickens and the light thins, a quiet reversal takes place. You're not visiting the past. You're becoming part of a design that was never abandoned, only buried. There's a theory, a forgotten one, that suggests the pyramid was not only built to preserve energy, but to mark the reawakening of a cycle, a geophysical pulse, a celestial breath. The Earth, it says, is not static. It turns, yes, It rotates and spins and wobbles, but it also remembers. Through the magnetism of its poles, through the rhythm of its crust, through sudden shifts, some seen, some yet to come. And structures like the Great Pyramid were placed not merely on sacred land, but on tectonic nodes, energy intersections, places where Earth's memory accumulates and releases. Modern science hints at this without realizing it. The Schumann resonance, the natural pulse of the Earth, is not constant. It shifts, spikes, quiets. Some researchers believe the pyramid amplifies this frequency, that it was built to listen to the Earth, or perhaps to speak with it. And this changes the question entirely, because if the pyramid is not just aligned to the stars, but attuned to the Earth, then it wasn't a tomb at all. It was a bridge. Between ground and sky, between human and cosmic, between memory and form. But bridges require travelers. And who were they? Not the pharaohs, not the tourists, but those who understood stone not as material, but as medium. Those who knew that sound could shape matter, that geometry could store intention, that a pyramid perfectly built was not a monument, but a frequency lock, a resonant chamber waiting for the right tone, the right heart, the right moment. Maybe that's why we haven't opened the hidden chamber above the Grand Gallery, not because we can't, but because part of us knows, instinctively, that it's not time. That the pyramid is not a puzzle to be solved, but a process to be completed. And that process might have just begun. Because we are approaching another turning. Another moment when the cycle loops and resets. The precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year drift of the Earth's axis, approaches the same alignment it held in 10,500 BCE. The same era the stars matched the pyramids. The same age the Sphinx would have faced its lion-shaped constellation at dawn. Coincidence? Or calibration? Many believe this cycle marks not destruction, but disclosure. Not of aliens or conspiracies, but of truth. A flood not of water, but of memory. And perhaps the pyramid was built not to survive the last flood, but to guide us through the next one. Because knowledge, when lost, doesn't die, it waits. Encoded in myth, in symbol, in the whisper of structure that refuses to fall. And the Great Pyramid whispers loudest when no one speaks at all. Think of what we've forgotten. The ability to live in harmony with the Earth's rhythms. The sense of architecture as a tool for healing. The understanding of the human body not as separate from the planet, but as a reflection of it. The pineal gland, the so-called third eye, is shaped like a pyramid. It responds to light. It regulates our circadian rhythm. Some ancient traditions believed it to be the seat of the soul, a receiver, a transmitter. Is it coincidence that the very structure built to outlast time echoes this form? That the king's chamber sits precisely where the inner eye of the pyramid would be? Had it a body? We don't know. But the alignments keep multiplying. So many that they stop being anomalies and start becoming architecture. Intentional, telling a story of a world that saw in symbols what we only see in machines, that encoded language in angles, that sang reality into stone. And perhaps that world still speaks, through dreams, through déjà vu, through the hush that falls over those who walk the Giza Plateau under starlight. Not because it's sacred, but because it's alive. You begin to wonder if the Great Pyramid was ever truly built at all, or if it was summoned, remembered, drawn from something deeper than planning, deeper than calculation. from the part of us that existed before language, the part of us that knew without learning. And if that part is stirring again, now in our strange, fractured era, it may be because we're nearing another doorway, one that doesn't open outward, but inward. And maybe the pyramid doesn't guard that doorway. Maybe it is the doorway. And the moment we remember not what it is, but why it was left behind, that's when it opens. Not with sound, but with silence. There's a kind of gravity to the Great Pyramid that has nothing to do with mass. It draws you in, not just physically, but imaginatively, spiritually, psychically. A pull not from the outside, but from something inside you that recognizes it, even if your mind cannot explain why. It's not a building you simply observe. It's a presence that observes you back. And as we draw nearer to understanding, or remembering, it becomes clear. The pyramid was never meant to be interpreted through logic alone. Logic is too brittle, too flat. What it holds is layered, cyclical, dimensional, maybe even alive. We're told it's stone, that it's inert, that it's just stacked blocks arranged by ancient ingenuity. But that story crumbles under its own simplicity. You don't build a monument to echo the movement of stars, to encode the shape of the planet, to hum with frequencies that affect brain waves. Unless it's more than a monument. You build it to last. You build it to align. You build it because you know time itself will forget, and you want to leave behind something that won't. And that's what this is. The pyramid isn't an artifact, it's a message. Not written in letters, but in ratios, angles, shadows, orientation. It uses math the way poetry uses rhythm. Not to instruct, but to evoke. It invites us to feel what we've been trained to ignore. Resonance. We measure the king's chamber and find its frequency resonates with the Earth's Schumann resonance, around 7.83 Hz. We scan it with modern tools and find unexplained heat anomalies, strange voids, chambers that absorb sound instead of reflecting it. None of this aligns with the function of a tomb, but it does align with the function of a mechanism, a machine, a forgotten technology designed not to move, but to remember. So what does it remember? Or what does it want us to? Maybe it's not what's inside the pyramid that matters most. Maybe it's what the pyramid is inside of. Because to truly understand its purpose, we have to look beyond its walls, across oceans, across time, across civilizations that rose and vanished like breaths. And what we find, again and again, is the same structure, the same obsession with alignment, the same silent language of stone. Teotihuacan, Angkor Wat, Machu Picchu, the megaliths of Japan, the pyramids of China, hidden beneath trees, denied by authorities. It's as if someone, long ago, tried to seed the earth with memory, not in books, but in mountains made by hands, all aligned, all watching the sky, all waiting. And here's where it starts to feel less like coincidence and more like coordination. These ancient structures not only mirror star systems, but each other. Their dimensions, their mathematical constants, their symbolic motifs. How does a pyramid in Mexico echo the golden ratio found in a pyramid in Egypt, both echoing constellations mirrored again in temples half a world away? It makes you wonder, were they not just remembering something common, but responding to something shared, something cosmic? The Earth is not a dead planet. It pulses. It breathes. And perhaps those who came before us knew how to listen. Perhaps they built not only to reflect the stars, but to resonate with the planet's field. To use architecture as a stabilizer, a transmitter, a tuning fork to harmonize human consciousness with natural rhythms. In that context, the Great Pyramid isn't the exception. It's the exemplar. And if that's true, then we must consider something even more unsettling. What if the pyramid wasn't only built to remember a past event, but to prepare for a future one? The sky changes. Over thousands of years, the positions of the stars shift. The Earth wobbles. The constellations rise and fall like tides. And those ancient architects knew it. They encoded it. The precession of the equinoxes, the slow celestial cycle of 25,120 years, the same number broken into the pyramid's dimensions when scaled. Over and over, this number appears in calendars, temples, myths. Why? Because it's a clock. And like all clocks, it points to something. Maybe it points to now. To this strange moment where everything seems to accelerate and dissolve all at once. The climate changes. The magnetic poles shift. Ancient solar cycles peak. And beneath it all, a remembering. Not external, internal. What if the builders of the Great Pyramid knew this moment would come? What if they left behind not a structure to be deciphered by scholars, but a resonant field to be felt by those who could sense what was coming? We are not just facing environmental change, technological upheaval, and cultural collapse. We are approaching a threshold, and the pyramid stands at that threshold, not behind it, but beside it, like a guide, like a memory made solid, like the last song of a civilization that understood something we forgot. That time doesn't just move, it circles. And when it returns to its starting point, what was buried rises again. So maybe the Great Pyramid is rising now. Not physically, not visibly, but within us. Maybe it was always meant to be activated not by tools, but by attention, by presence. By a generation willing to step out of the noise and into the stillness, not to worship, not to conquer, but to listen. Because the pyramid doesn't demand belief. It doesn't require translation. It simply is. And in its being, it asks the question we've been avoiding all along. What if this was never about how they built it? What if it's about how we forgot why? In the end, it's not the mystery of the Great Pyramid that lingers. It's the silence it leaves behind. A silence so complete, so immovable, it feels less like absence and more like a boundary, as if the structure itself is not just refusing to answer our questions, but gently insisting we are asking the wrong ones. We came searching for origin stories, for names and dates, for the comfort of a known builder and a clear purpose. But what we found instead was something deeper, something older than language, older than kings, older perhaps than the desert itself. A question carved into stone. A question that doesn't begin with who built it, but with what were they trying to preserve? Because that's the feeling that clings to the pyramid long after you've left it behind, that it's not a monument to death. It's a vessel of survival. Not survival of the body, survival of memory, of a moment, of a knowing, of a time when we were different. Not more advanced in the way we now define it, but more aligned, more connected, more attuned to the subtle geometries of the world, to the music beneath the matter. The builders, whoever they were, understood something that we have only just begun to rediscover, that form and function are inseparable from frequency, that shape, space, and sound are all part of the same equation, that a temple, a chamber, a stone itself can carry meaning without a single word. The pyramid teaches nothing, but it reminds. It doesn't explain, it evokes. It doesn't lead us through knowledge. It places us before it, as if to say, "You've always had this, you've just forgotten how to feel it." Maybe that's why it's endured for so long. Because it was never about transmitting information. It was about holding space. A geometry of remembrance, waiting for us to come back, not as scholars, but as listeners. And maybe we're almost ready. Because around the world, in ways small and large, the veil is beginning to thin. We're questioning the histories we were taught. We're mapping the skies the ancients once charted. We're reawakening the old sciences, not as superstition, but as lost wisdom. Sound therapy, sacred geometry, harmonic resonance. Fields once dismissed are now returning, not to replace modern knowledge, but to complete it. We are returning to the place where knowing is not about domination, but alignment. Where to know something is not to dissect it, but to feel its rhythm. And in that shift, the pyramid becomes something else entirely. Not a puzzle, a portal. One that doesn't open to a place, but to a way of being. A way of seeing the world as whole, as living, as sacred not because of myth, but because of mathematics. And sacred not because we're told it is, but because when we stand before it, in shadow or in sun, we feel it in the breath, in the spine, in the silence between thoughts. That is the technology we've forgotten. The inner one. And the pyramid? It's a mirror. It reflects what we bring to it. Curiosity, doubt, longing. And when the noise fades, what remains is a kind of resonance that has no name. Some call it memory, some truth, some awakening. But all it asks is that we stay in the question. Not to conclude it, to live inside it. Because the pyramid never closes the loop. It offers no final answer, no tomb inscription, no blueprint or instruction manual, only clues, only alignments, only a silence vast enough to hear ourselves again. And that's the real miracle, that the builders, wherever they came from, whoever they were, trusted us enough to leave no instructions, only form, only pattern, only vibration, as if to say, "You will remember, when you're ready, when the stars return to their stations, when the wheel of time completes its turn. Perhaps that moment is near. Perhaps it is already here. And perhaps the final lesson of the Great Pyramid is not about the past at all. Perhaps it's about what we choose to build next. Because to remember is not to retreat. It is to reclaim, to build again, but differently. Not higher, not faster, but deeper. Aligned not to ego, but to earth, to sky, to silence. We are not the first to walk this way. But we might be the first in a very long time to remember why the path was built. The Great Pyramid remains, because memory endures in stone, and some questions are not meant to be answered. They are meant to awaken,